Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Just before the weekend, we are here for another Snap Reports class, a class where we learn new things, new tricks to help us with Excel reports and make them easy to update, make them ready to be updated very quickly. So we do the work once, and the next time we need to repeat our task, we have that task already facilitated, and it can be accomplished in just a few seconds or minutes, but in a very short time. We don't want to be repeating the same process all over again. My name is Celia Alves. I am an Excel developer, and today we will be talking about flexible columns. What that means is, imagine a situation, and this came from a student recently who asked this question. And in fact, I have dealt with that situation before in different circumstances where for some reason we need our query to handle the columns that we want to import. So the situation today will be when we have the same data source, but we don't always want to import the same columns. It could also happen that the data source changes the columns every time we update the data. We could probably handle that situation in another class. If you have that problem and you need help to solve that, remember, put a comment in the under the video, and I will be looking at those columns, and every time I find something that could be useful to teach you and other people, for more people to know how to do it, I will bring this in a next class. Okay, so let me share my screen. I will be showing you first what we are going to build, what the purpose is for our class today, and then we will start from scratch. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, not yet. Now I think you should be seeing my screen. If you can give me a thumbs up there on the video comments, on the comments, either on YouTube or on Facebook, it would be very helpful. So this is the question. I have a data source. In this case, the data source is inside this workbook, but it could be outside in another file. And we have a query that connects to that file and brings the data. Or it could be a folder and it combines all the information of different files from that folder. It doesn't matter. So imagine that you already have a query prepared, bringing information to you. And I see here Wayne Edmondson. Hi, Wayne. He's seeing the screen. Thank you for confirming that. And the question. So let's imagine that we have a fixed data source with certain columns. We have a query already prepared that brings us these columns. They could suffer some transformation or not, but from the point that we have all the columns from that data source, or certain columns coming in from the data source, I want to be able to um, pick the ones I want. Let's imagine that depending on the situation, our boss, our manager asks us, well, I want to report with column A, B, and C, or just the two columns, or all the columns, depending on what the person needs to analyze. For example, in this case, what we see here is that I put all the columns here on this table. These are the column names that are in our data source. And then we give the possibility to the user to pick up the columns they want. So for example, let's imagine we want to pick item and buyer only, and state, for example. And the user chooses the columns he or she wants, putting an X on this column. That's the instructions we have here. And then all we need to do is to come to the data tab, refresh all, and our resulting report updates here. Again, this could be loaded to a separate sheet, for example. The data source could be in a separate file, but today we are just putting everything in the same sheet so that it's easier for us to see and compare. So we see that we have here up to column row 72, and same thing on the green column on the right. So let's see how we can build this. I'm going to close and and let me just put up here my screen where already where I'm preparing the file. So Wayne is asking, is the X case sensitive? We will be preparing our file to deal with that situation. So Power Query is case sensitive. If the user is not careful and types in a lowercase x, or an uppercase, or puts in extra spaces, then the query will be Power Query does not like that. It won't know how to deal with that. So we need to explain how to deal with that. We will go through that situation. Thank you for your question, Wayne. So let's start with this file. I have the data source here, and let me in fact share my screen, because otherwise you won't see what I need. Okay, so we have the data source here, and let's just build one query to load these data. We are not going to worry about any cleansing. In fact, the data is quite clean at this time, at this point. So we go to data, and we want to load data from a table or a range, in this case, a table. The table has probably a name. Let me bring the Power Query editor that opened on my other screen. Let me bring it here. Let me know if you are seeing everything correctly. I've been making some adjustments with my screens lately to be able to get better quality. The quality of the image on the past few videos was not good, and I apologize for that, but it's a matter of adjusting equipment and applications and all that, and I hope this session goes better than the previous ones in regards to that. So we went, I loaded get data from table/range, and Power Query editor open, and we get these two steps here: source and change type. The change type always, by default, Power Query has that enabled, and until recently we could not really change that on a permanent basis. We could do it on at the workbook level, but now I have good news. We can, in fact, if we don't like that Power Query changes the data type automatically, we can now have a setting to disable that. And let me show you how to do that. If we go to file here on the Power Query editor, and then options and settings, query options, and here we have two levels, two sections. One about for the one that says global, so it means settings that will apply globally to any Excel file where we use Power Query, and the other section for current workbook. We now have under global data load, and here we have type detection, and we have, by default, it comes with the text column types and headers for unstructured sources, any etc. etc. So we can choose always the text column types in this situation, or never the text column types. I now have in my work profile session, I have this set up like this, because it will do is that it won't annoy us with all this all the time with the automatic step of changing type. So we would get our in this case, if I had had that option enabled before I started my query. In fact, let's do that. Let me close the query and start again. If we go to data, get data or not, we can go directly here from table slash range. Let's see if this worked. So you see now the data type step to change the data type and that did not appear at this point. Let's work like that. Like I said, our data, it's not the purpose today to transform anything in our data. So we just want to charge it, to load it to our workbook. Let's imagine that I wanted, just for the purpose of, as an example, to then adapt our query. Let's imagine that the columns that we wanted to select were item and buyer. Before we select the columns, we do need to have the data types defined so that our data goes correctly with the correct data type defined in each column when we load it to our workbook. So if I have this option disabled, now I want to go and define all the data types. I could use the one that was made it, automatically before, that is the tag data type here in the transform tab. I can use the tag data type there. And if I do that, it will try to guess some of the columns. It was not really very successful, only the first one. So probably because I only had that one selected. So everything is text until here. Right click and change type. And then here, let's change type to text. Okay. And here we have a date. Here we have text. And the reason I'm doing this for all the columns is because in the example that we are investigating, seeing today, we want the user to choose the columns. So we need to leave all the columns prepared for the user. Right click and change type. And in this case, it would be currency. And for the quantity, it can be a whole number. Okay, so I have my data types here defined. And now I would go close and load. Well, before close and load, I want to select some columns. So just to start our query, let's imagine that just the first two columns were selected by the user, item and buyer. So I select the columns I want, right click, and I go remove other columns, and then close and load to, close and load to. In this case, I'm going to load to a table in the existing worksheet, and I'm going to put the result here. And okay. The query was named after the table. So this table has the name table 1. We could have changed the name of the table before if we wanted to, and we can rename our query. Now the query is giving me an error, probably because I changed the name of the table. Let's see what it's complaining about. Yeah, because the name of the table is hard-coded here. So how did I call it? I called it sales, I think it was. Let's see. Oh, something went wrong there. Let me close this. What's going on there? I didn't hit enter. Let's go sales, enter. Oh, the name already exists. Okay, so I'm doing a mess here. I'm selecting the green final resulting table instead of the blue one. So the blue one is called sales. And this one is not called sales because there was already a table sales. So Power Query will never assign two names, the same name to different tables. So let's just rename here, rename, and let's call it selected report. Selected report, or just report. It could be report. Let's go and fix, because I was changing things back and forth here, and let's see that the error occurs here for sure. So the name of the table, I did something here that I don't know quite well what I did, but let's see. Sales. Okay, so the name of the blue table, which is the source, is sales. Initially it was table 1. I renamed that table to sales, so now we have to change the name of the table here on the query. Okay, so now everything looks good, no errors. And the report, I named it selected report. Okay. The purpose here is to give the user the chance to choose which columns to load into the final report. So I'm going to select all the columns here. I'm going to do Control C. I'm going to go here and we'll choose right click, and then we'll choose this option to transpose. So it pastes all the columns vertically instead of horizontally. Here I would have a name for this column, which would be column. These are the names of the columns. And here I will create a new column called select. And in here, I'm going just to clear the formats, and then Control T to insert a table. My table has headers, and now I have a table here. I'm going to change just the style. Maybe this one, no banded rows. And I'm going to put here just, in fact, I don't want this gray. This one, that's what I want. Okay. So, and then in here, I'm going to just leave a note for the user to know what to do. X to select. So now we are saying, enter an X in the columns you want to get in your final report. So let's say the person wants to see the buyer, the city, and the state. Let me put this centered. We need to account for the situation, as Wayne was advising us before, that the user may not always enter an X. So for example, here I put an X uppercase, and in here I put an X. I typed in an X lowercase, and we are not always paying attention. Sometimes we do like this. Other times we could enter a space at the end, or for example, let's say I also want a phone number. Sometimes for some reason we could type spaces before or after, or we could be copying for another. In this case, doesn't make much sense to copy from another place, but sometimes that's what happens. We copy information from other places and we paste, and it comes with extra space characters. And Power Query is case sensitive and will interpret an X or an X with a space as two different things, or an X lowercase and uppercase, two different things as well. We will deal with that. So now we want to make this, transfer this information to our final report. We want that by, after the user selects which columns wants to see in the final report, by hitting refresh all, we will see those columns in the final report. So what we need to do first is to load this table to a separate query. So we select anywhere here on the table, any cell. We go to data tab, and then we go to from table / range, and I didn't put a name to this column, to this table, so Excel named it table 3. Let's name this selected columns. That's the name of this query. And what we want to do, we want to create a list of the columns that we want to indicate into the other query that are the selected columns. And I will tell you, I forgot to go there and open that query first to show you why a list, but I will show you that in a minute. So what we need to do here, let's go first, use first rows as, let's see. Okay, we don't need to use first rows as headers. We already have the headers, and it should be like that because we have a table. So let's go and just define the data types here. This is text, and this is also text. And we want to filter everything that has an X here. But before that, if we come here to filter, you see that all these are considered different options: uppercase, lowercase, with extra spaces, etc. So we can first, for example, take care of the extra spaces. If we come here to transform and then format, we can use this option trim that will eliminate any extra spaces before our text starts and after our text starts. Contrarily to what happens with the trim function in Excel, trim in Power Query will not eliminate double space characters inside a string. But we don't have these here because our string only has one character and no spaces in the middle. So that's fine. Then we want to put everything either uppercase or lowercase. Doesn't matter. You choose what you like best. Let's say uppercase. So we transform everything as uppercase. So at this moment, we know that our column is prepared, and we can see here that now we only have two options, either null or uppercase X. So what I want to say is to Power Query is give me only the rows that have an X. I select that, and if we pay attention here to our M code bar at the top, not sure if you see it well, and I was trying to zoom, but zoom today doesn't seem to be working well. We can see here that the M code generated is table selector rows where uppercase text is the previous step in the query, and where the column selected is equal to X. So that's exactly what we want, okay? You see here, uppercase text is the previous step. That's what we have here on the formula. And I told you that we want a list of the column names. So the list is in here. We can first remove other columns. We select the column we want and we remove the other column. And now we still have a column, not a list. I could refer to this, if I refer to table and then column inside the table, I will have the same result, which is a list. But since I want to get this already ready for the next report, for the next query, I am going to come here into the transform tab and use convert to list. So now I have a list of all the column names that the user wants to extract from the data source. Okay, so I'm going to do now home, close and load to. I already have this information here, so I don't really need to load it to as a table to the workbook. I'm going to choose only create connection. Okay, and now we have this separate report not report, sorry, this separate query that gives us all the column names that we need. So we have, let me just do a pause here to see if we have any questions or comments so far. And, oh, hi, Alexandra. Nice to see you. And thank you, Wayne, for indicating that the screen is looking good. No, thank you too for indicating that. Yes, Wayne is suggesting we could also implement yes and no data validation to the select column here. That would be another option. Or even just, but even with a yes and no, if the user types in yes uppercase and no lowercase, we still have to deal with that because the data validation is not case sensitive, I believe. So we would still have to deal with that problem. We will have trim space, extra spaces to trim, but we for sure would have to deal with uppercase and lowercase anyways. Okay. So now that we have a query here with the columns that we want, we can give this information, pass this information into the other query. Let's go double click here. And let's look at the last step in this query. The last step in this query, if you remember, we had all the data source and we eliminated all the columns except the ones we wanted to keep. And because we chose item and buyer, those column names were hard-coded here in the M code. So we have item and buyer here hard-coded in this step. So Power Query, the way it is now, is prepared to always select the columns that have names item and buyer. But we want it to be flexible. Let me try another zoom tool here. I've been playing with different zoom options and softwares and platforms and all that. So it seems that I need to find a good combination. So if you remember, the second query that we built that has the names of the columns that the user selected is a query named selected columns. And this portion here in our code is a list when this portion in between curly brackets indicates a list. So instead of having a fixed list with two elements, item and buyer, I want Power Query to replace this list to the list, and we already have the IntelliSense helping us here, the list produced by the query selected columns. So I can just do that. And now I just need to come to the end like this. I'm going to zoom out. So now we have buyer, city, state, and phone, which were the columns that we had previously chosen in our table. So now we just need to close and load, and our report here will update. Now we can test. So let's imagine now we want to bring the item and the quantity. I'm going to put an upper case X here, and the total I'm going to put an uppercase with an extra space. And the purpose, let me close this. The purpose is to get here on the right side. Let me maybe just narrow these columns here so that we have more room. So now we want to get a report at the end that has item, quantity, and total as the resulting columns, the columns in our resulting final report. So let's just do a refresh all, and there we have item, quantity, and total. Those are our selections. If I just put, let's say, item, right click, refresh, and we get a report with just the column item. So let's see that this is what I had to show you today. I hope it was useful for you. Just test the data validation is case sensitive. Let me double check that, Wayne. So let's say in this cell here, I'm going to go to data validation list. I'm going to put yes or no as options. So we now have option yes and no, lowercase. If I add an uppercase, doesn't match data validation restrictions for this cell. You are right. Cancel. Let me see another way of building this. If we had, because I could swear that before it wasn't, it was not case sensitive, but maybe I had a dream some other life. Let's imagine, let me name this range here as options, and let's put data validation list source. If I add the name options, let me see if this will work. Yes, it's lowercase, uppercase. Yeah, so in this case, it's not case sensitive. Same things if I put an N. So that's interesting oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Sorry about that. Let me go back. Okay, so let me repeat everything. Let me put, so it's interesting to see that data validation can be case sensitive or not, depending on how we define our the options for that data validation. Let me put another color, for example, this one. So in this cell, I'm going to define data validation, and I'm going to say a list, and I'm going to say yes, comma, no are my, yes, Y and N are my options for this cell. Okay. So now I have these two options. If I choose from the drop down, that's fine. If I type in a Y lowercase, I'm fine. If I go and type an uppercase Y and enter, it doesn't let me. It says that it doesn't match the options, data validation restrictions. So it's being the case sensitive in this case. So cancel. But if I put Y and N here in this range, and I name this range as options, I came here to this name box and typed in options and then enter. So this range here has a name options. And in this cell, I came to data and then data validation, same thing, list. And instead of typing here, Y and N as options, I went F3 to pick up the names I have, shows the name and the option's name. Okay. So these are my options. And if I come here and type an N lowercase, it's fine. If I type in a Y lowercase, it's fine too. And what about if I type an uppercase? It's fine too. So that's interesting. And I usually, most of the times, I create my data validation options like this. I create names, named ranges with my options so that I have the ability to easily go there and um, add an extra option if I need to. So I was convinced that data validation was not case sensitive. And with Wayne's suggestion, we just tested, it can be case sensitive if we, instead of using a range where our options are, if we define the data validation typing in the options here instead of using a named range. That's an interesting situation. Thank you, Wayne, for asking that question. That made me and us test these options. Um, I wonder if this is the same in all Excel versions. I know that they just recently made some improvements or some changes, at least in the data validation dialog box. I wonder if this is the same in all Excel versions. Before, I'm using Microsoft 365. Um, so let me know if you have other Excel versions and you are watching this and you want to test in your on your end. Let me know what happens in your case if data validation has a behavior like the one we just saw now or a different one. Okay, let's see what other comments we have here. No, all the best for Global Excel Summit. Yes, so tomorrow there will be a big Excel event, Global Excel Summit. I hope some of you can attend. I'm sure it will be a tremendous event. I'm preparing, I have a presentation there tomorrow about how I put everything together, not everything, a lot of features together inside Excel, how I put them together to build a business solution. So I'll be presenting, talking about a specific case, a specific project that seemed to be a very simple request in the beginning and ended up being quite challenging project. And I will talk about the fundamental features and tools inside Excel that I used and combined to create a solution for that particular case. And then that will be tomorrow. And then on Monday and Tuesday, I will be delivering a class, a master class about Power Query. Fundamentals of Power Query in Excel. So it's mostly designed for those of you who are taking the first steps in Power Query, want to know what Power Query is, how to start using, what are the main tools that you can start using right away. The purpose of that masterclass is to give you enough knowledge to when you leave the masterclass, you will be able to start using it in your work and creating your first queries with Power Query. So I hope that some of you can attend the event. I'm sure it will be a great one. So I have a question here from Wayne. If the list point to an actual range, it is case sensitive. If no, if to a named range, then not. That's another interesting tip. So if we type, so let's test this final. So that's a third situation, different than this previous one. So let's test this again here too. Let's put this another column. Let's say green, another color. And so for this cell, let's imagine that I want to have the same options, yes and no, but instead of naming that range, I'm not going to, no, that name is already named. So let me see, okay, let's test different things. So data validation, any value list. If I come to the source and say, I need to tap the equal, I believe. I point to this, yeah. So if I type point to this range, because the range already has a name, it automatically picks up the name. So let's discard this and let's start. Let's put yes and no here, but let's not name the range. So if I come to the cell, data validation, list, and I point the source to this range without giving a name to this range, okay, we have the options yes and no here. If I go yes, lowercase, of course it works. Let's say if I go Y, it doesn't, it also lets me. So Wayne, I just tested the named range and it is also case sensitive. No, it's not being case sensitive in my case. So it could be a matter of different Excel options, or we are Excel versions, or we are doing something different. So for example, if you look at here, I have, and if I type in an N uppercase, it works. And if I type in an N lowercase, it also works. And it's pointing to that range here that have no name. So that's interesting. I have this impression that in most situations, data validation is not case sensitive. It's not acting as case sensitive here in my computer and this Excel version specifically. It may happen that in other versions has a different behavior, but so it's an interesting item to pay attention to, because if we are implementing data validation to make sure that the users enter the data the way we need it to be, and if we are transferring that information inputted by the user to either Power Query or VBA, being uppercase or lowercase will make a difference. So we need to prepare our code in either the circumstances to deal with the possibility of data validation having had allowed the user to enter data on different casing styles. Not sure if that's how you do it, how you say it. Okay, so maybe version differences. I'm on Microsoft 365 Retail, not Insider on this system. I am Microsoft 365 and I am not on, it's the business version, I would say, but it's not the Insider one. So thank you for bringing that up, Wayne. And we'll see you soon, I guess. If there are no more questions, that was my proposal for you today. I hope you enjoyed this topic, and it's one more thing that we can apply to our reports. If you saw, we worked a little bit with the M code, learning M code. M code is I don't know everything about M code. I'm not an expert in M code, but I do my best to pay attention to the steps that Power Query generates and get acquainted, more familiar with the M language generated and play with it. And in some circumstances, although the user interface in Power Query Editor already gives us a lot of options, a lot of tools, sometimes they are not enough for what we need. So it's always nice to understand what the M codes, each piece of it, and how to modify it to have it working the way we really need. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.